Randy's in another meeting, Mr. Starr is as well, I don't know where Paul is, so we'll go ahead and get started. We'll just go around the table. Ms. Hanley, just introduce ourselves for the record.
Alice Hanley, Election Commission.
Bonnie Lynn Babb.
Joyce Anderson. Gwen Matthew.
Petey Strack. Vicki Cantrell, Election Commission.
Adam Trombley.
Dennis Wheeler, Municipal Attorney.
No? Okay. You guys have the floor.
I think I have the floor,
Oh,
actually.
yeah.
Yeah. This is a preview, if you will, or an overview of what I've been working on with the clerk's office in terms of trying to make some changes and updates to the election code, born out of our last couple of years of experience, and taking into account not only the things that we ran into that we needed to address, but trying to do some updates. I looked also at some state law provisions to see if there were things there that we ought to consider incorporating to address these issues, as well as cover things that might come up in the future we hadn't thought of before. So this first page is just sort of a quick bullet point of the kinds of things we're looking at. We talked a lot about protecting voter information. We have scenarios where we now have experience with election watchers and observers. They want to see everything. Of course, they can't see everything, but we do need to let them see the process and have some transparency of what we do. We have some issues with campaigns who request information, voter lists, and so on, so that they can make contact with those voters. And certainly under state law, there's opportunities for the voters to protect some of that information with respect to addresses, and of course we need to protect social security numbers and voter ID. So we kind of address those issues. We looked at ways to improve voting opportunities. Some of these include making it possible for the clerk's office to process electronic requests as time allows. I think the state had a provision that allowed some requests to come in as late as 5 o'clock the day before the election. We can accommodate some of that, but we can't guarantee it if they wait till the last minute. So certainly the clerk's office expectation is that if they can do it, they'll do it. But we would encourage people to try and ask early. We talked about polling locations, absentee polling locations, things like that. Giving the clerk's office some flexibility to add locations. We've got 3 or 4 that are specified in code, but if there's an opportunity to add a couple on top of that, if resources allow, if there's demand for it, they can do that. So those are some different things we looked at in terms of improving opportunities. Some streamlining in terms of some of the processes that we have. We want to change some code to reflect what we're doing now, where the code is out of sync with those things that we do, and discuss the use of technology. I incorporated a whole new chapter on state criminal laws with respect to voter fraud or election official misconduct that rises to the level of a misdemeanor offense. Nothing that you guys have done, by the way. But in addition to the criminal side, there are also some things we've done with respect to inappropriate conduct by election officials that might happen at a polling location. We had an incident last year, and this just clarifies that the clerk, if she becomes aware of a problem, can address it quickly, and if that means removing the official, then so be it. There are some criminal laws in the state code on campaign misconduct. Some of that has to do with how campaigns behave near a polling location. Those things I've incorporated. There's others that deal more with campaign finance, campaign disclosure, the stuff that APOC deals with. I didn't bring any of that in. That's not our business, our bailiwick. We can leave that to the state to deal with. So you'll see some provisions where I don't mention misconduct in the first degree or misconduct in the second degree. Some of those things are felony charges that we don't handle at the local level, that aren't really appropriate for us to handle. So those things aren't included. That's why you might say, well, first and second, well, we don't handle those. We just pick up the third, things like that. I adopted a chapter on emergency procedures so that if the power goes out or if there's not enough ballots at the polling location, anything like that, which theoretically could happen, that the clerk is empowered to take appropriate action And here's the scenario. The assembly is empowered to enact emergency ordinances. But when you're talking about something that's happening on election day, you don't have time to try to get the majority of the assembly together to take action, because you need to react in minutes, not a half hour, not an hour, 2 hours, whatever it might be. So we had some provisions in there with some constraint that if it's something that could be dealt with prior to the election and she could pull the assembly together to make a change. Say you have the Lusac Library all of a sudden is no longer available as a polling location because something happened. Then if there's time, she can call an emergency meeting of the assembly, they can change it. If there's not time, pipes burst, things flooded, she can make a change on the fly, things like that. And then of course, at the very bottom of this first page, how to deal with election observers. To the best of my knowledge, last year was the first time we really ran into a demand for observers and watchers to actually be involved. And we pasted in on the fly the guidelines that the state uses, and it seemed to work okay, but we want to make it more formal, so it's laid out there more clearly. So that's the down and dirty overview. Now that results in about 60 pages worth of changes. But a lot of that is that you put the changes in context. So you take the whole code section, which might be this much, and you're only changing 3 words, right? But there you go, it's a page worth of text to look at. And what I tried to do in this, just by way of explanation, is put the exact code change in that middle column called change. In the right hand, I tried to put in notes as to why we were doing it. That's very helpful, especially as you ask yourself, why are we doing this? And then later on, if this meets assembly approval, something like this would be nice to have as part of the record. It wouldn't necessarily be an exhibit, but it would certainly be part of the clerk's file. So people could go back and have questions about what we were trying to accomplish to apply it. They could just go, oh, okay, here's what they were trying to do. So we'll follow it along that way. And I don't know that, what we might want to do is hit some highlights, if we've got time, highlights. But I'm not going to try to run through this entire thing, because you guys are going to want to read it. The assembly's going to want to read it, think about it, talk about it. Should I just go through
Do the
pages and
highlights.
see
That
what
sounds great.
jumps out at me? Okay. Let's see, where do I want to hit the first one? I'm actually going to jump down a few pages. So let's talk about, on page 4, the code section 282020, method of notice. So it used to say that all notices required by this chapter shall be published. Well, of course, we changed our code in other contexts here a few years ago to allow publication by the community to be through its websites versus using a newspaper. And I think the estimate at one time was we could save maybe as much as $80,000 a year publication costs. The state law talks about publishing at least once in the newspaper of general circulation for election issues. And the thought was, although we may be able to work around that state law because we're home rule, I think the decision was that we would continue to publish, and we wanted to go ahead and put that in code that we were going to publish. And we have a lot of different notices that we send out in terms of vacancies for office and when the election's coming up and all those sorts of things. And the clerk's office is wanting to make sure that those things are all in the newspaper as well as on the websites, so that maximum notification, maybe that results in maximum participation at the other end. So that's one thing we wanted to better clarify. The next big one is going to be down in 283030, declaration of candidacy. We've had some small issues with regard to whether somebody wanted to withdraw. So we tried to clean that up a little bit about how the withdrawal works. 283040 on page 7 at the bottom, subsection B, and then we turn the page all the way down through J. I just added this yesterday, so the clerk's office probably hasn't had a chance to see this, but I was reading through the state regs, and they talk about how someone can challenge a candidate's eligibility. Our code simply said the clerk may disqualify somebody at any time. Well, what we didn't have was, what would happen if somebody came in and said, hey, so-and-so isn't qualified, they haven't been here long enough, or whatever the reason might be, they're not old enough. So I thought, well, I looked at the state's process, and look, it's a lot of words, but it's actually pretty straightforward. Clerk receives a complaint, reviews the complaint based on available public records, notifies the candidate that their eligibility has been challenged. There's this process that they go through pretty quickly to let the clerk make that determination. So I put that in there.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is that from the state statute then, or is that,
Yeah, that's right out of the state reg,
okay,
state regulation, yeah.
okay.
In fact, I had the site there, if you look at page 7, it's from 6 AAC 25260.
Okay.
The only change really that they did is they had identified the election director as the person who does this process. Of course, our equivalent is the school clerk. Let's see, the next one that might be of interest. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of this is cleanup on what we call ballots and sample ballots, official ballots, tabulated ballots, and so we're trying to clean all that up, so you'll see a lot of that in here. Go to 285010 on page 13, this might generate some conversation. We wanted to do a couple of things in these sections. One, we had this habit of, in the code, of calling the people at the polling locations an election board. And then, of course, the clerk has the authority to create certain boards in certain situations. And of course, we also have an election commission. And one place in the code, there's actually a phrase that says the election commission board. Typo, I don't know, I haven't researched it, but, so we tried to clean that up a little bit so we could better identify who we're talking about, whether they're an organized board, chair, or something else. So we tried to just talk about election officials at the precinct versus an election board, because that was confusing. The other thing we did here is give the clerk the flexibility to use election officials more efficiently, rather than mandating 4 at every precinct, which is really hard to do. We've changed this so that she has at least 2. You've talked about
There's 2
3
polling-
tends to be a pretty good number for most precincts.
There's 2 polling places that over the last couple of years have averaged about 15 to 20 voters all day long. So there's just 2 polling places, and it's, 4 workers at a polling place that has 15 people over a 12-hour day is, so.
So we want to get a little more flexibility in terms of staffing. And another new thing there, the bottom, subsection C, this comes out of state law, and I thought, well, we haven't had this problem yet, which just means it's going to happen to us. This seems to be the way it works. So C talks about how a candidate and an election official can't have a relationship in terms of that election official working a precinct where that candidate is going to be on the ballot. I don't know that it's ever come up before, but yes.
that came up with the state ballot,
Uh-huh.
and I realized there was a conflict, so I pointed out to the chairman, and I don't know if there was anything in writing, but my son was on the ballot, and I usually work on the precinct. I thought, that's not gonna be good.
Yeah, and under this, I don't know when the state reg went into effect, so I don't
That
know.
was state, I don't know if there was
I
a
don't know if
state
it was-
reg, but we
Yeah,
decided.
this is copied from the state reg, I don't know how new
But that's
this
a good-
is, but essentially it would say in that scenario, you couldn't work at that precinct, you have to work a different precinct. But if it was a statewide thing, I guess you couldn't work,
Yeah.
at least not at the precinct level, but whether they could work at some other level, I don't know. The next big one, you'll note that we, let's say for example, if you look at 285030, page 15, we tried to clarify that we're talking about polling locations throughout this. Sometimes we say polls, so we've tried to clarify that we're talking about the polling locations within each precinct. See that a lot in here. There were some violations that, like 285040, there's some violations that are listed in our Title 14, our hearing officer could hear those. So it created some cross-references to point that out. There's certain things election officials can't do. And you wouldn't necessarily, even if you saw them in our code, it wasn't clear what would happen. Now we tied it in so you can go back and, oh, okay, it's a violation, it's a citation, it goes to the hearing officer. So that's how that works. Talk about political persuasion near the polling locations on 50. Let's see, where's another good one here? You know, some of the changes that you recommended are going to be in here as well. For example, we had this scenario where an election official forgot to sign the absentee ballot envelope, I believe it was. So, and the state had a provision that could allow a waiver of that defect. So we've added that into our code as well. 2850-110 on page 17. In terms of what a voter can provide at the polling location for identification, we've clarified that you can use your registration card, driver's license, passport, hunting and fishing license, and then other identification recognized by the state for its elections. So if the state adds something or allows a certain kind of ID to be used, we'll honor that as well.
Will that be in training then, if
Yes.
they've added that?
Yes.
Well, when I voted, or when I worked in polls, if someone knows a person else,
Yeah,
you can have personal
Yes.
recognition. I didn't necessarily see
It's
it.
on B.
Yeah, subsection B.
Oh, it's B.
And
Oh, okay.
we've changed that so that it's not, if you know the person, you have to let them vote versus, what our code said was that election official may waive it. Well, yeah, I know you, but I'm not gonna let you vote. I mean, that sounds kind of funny.
I don't like you today, so I'm not going to.
Yeah. Your dog barked too much last night. You're right. That's it for you. Another interesting change, at next page, 2850-140. We talked about what happens if somebody has a spoiled ballot, what do you do with it? What we're looking at doing there is having the board, having the voter instead of the board tear up that ballot, so the voter is acknowledging that they've spoiled it, they tear it up. It goes into an envelope, and then that comes back with all the other election materials, and then later on it will be destroyed in the force with everything else that gets destroyed. Clarifying what we're going to do there. The next few sections there, 28-160 through 180, said there were certain things that officials couldn't do. We just created the cross-reference back to our Title 14. Most of that means that there's a fine, a $75 fine, is what the code currently provides for. Then what we did, 5193 through 5210 and other places later on, we tried to reorganize these code sections so it more closely followed the chronology of the process. So here's what you do right before closing the polls, making sure people know that they're going to close soon. If you're in line, you're going to get to vote, that sort of thing. All right, now the polls close. What's next? Okay, the next thing that happens is the election of workers at the precinct do these things. Then what happens next? Okay, next they package that all up. 2 of them deliver it to the designated location. What happens there? Okay, the election officials there receive the material, sign off on it on a log sheet. Then what? So we tried to structure the code in that fashion as best we could. So that's the primary idea behind some of what we're going to see in the latter half of Chapter 50. Is there anything there that you wanted to touch on that you guys can think of as far as a highlight? Okay. We talked about seal security a little bit. If they're damaged or broken, or I think we changed it to compromised. You could have a seal that's damaged but not necessarily compromised, things like that, what you do. Talked about using a new kind of seal. I think you experimented with that last year.
As you may remember, last year we purchased those seals that can only be removed with wire cutters. The discussion was, should we include that in code or not? And I think the conclusion we came to is it's something that we're trying over the next couple of years, but we don't want to tie ourselves to it if we decide to go back to the other ones that we used. But we do want to make sure that it is in code that the ballots remain secure. We just didn't want to break it down to exactly what we're using.
If you turn to page 25, the very bottom, 2860-035. This is where I mentioned earlier about the polling locations. So we identified those here. City Hall is at GX Senior Center. When they're going to be open, hours. We included a little link here to the website for more information, phone number, things like that. So if people are looking in code for where they can go and when they can start going and how to get information, put this right here in the code. I suppose most people would end up on your website first before coming to code, but just in case, this is another avenue for them to get this kind of information. 286060 and page 27. This adds some provisions on being able to get a ballot quickly, especially in those scenarios where you're out of state. Maybe you sent in a request for one by mail, for whatever reason you didn't get it. You can contact the clerk's office and try to get that ballot by email or fax and then send it in. Just try to accommodate those scenarios. On page 29, subsection H, Amanda and I worked on this a little bit yesterday. It may need a little bit more, we'll see. But right now, as I understand the process, it doesn't match what the old code says. The old code had a clerk receiving a transmission with the voter identification and the voter's ballot. They're supposed to take the ballot, put that in a secrecy sleeve, put that in another envelope that has this information on it. And then that all gets transmitted to whatever election official is going to actually review it. Well, right now, the election officials come into the by-mail review board room, and they have access to a computer, and so all these faxes come into the computer. So the clerk doesn't actually have to be involved in that process. And so there was a lot of extra handling there in the code that we don't actually do, so we're trying to clarify how we're going to do that to make it more clear. And then, of course, if you have the board doing those reviews, there's probably going to be a need to make sure it's clear that you may have observers or watchers there. So you're getting information regarding a ballot and the voter ID at the same time. So they're going to have to manage that so the observers can be there but not be too close to tie the voter to their votes.
Can I ask you a question on number
Yeah.
5 on H?
I'm sorry?
Number 5 on H there.
Yeah.
So that those ones were pretty much handled separate from us, and we just kind of got those at the end, correct? Isn't that the way it was? So are we going to be, because it's changed to election officials, is that still us? Or is that just the
I think it's still the
processes?
by-mail review board.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is one of those sections I mentioned where it had a weird code. It says election board commission. You see that in capital
Yeah,
letters there?
that's what's wrong.
Not sure what that was supposed to be. So we just put designated election officials so that whatever that process is going to be, it's
Contained.
it can take care of it, yeah. So 2870-15, page 30, this has to do with the, what was it called, the data processing board? So having the data processing board was sort of a difficult thing to manage in terms of staffing and so forth. So what we're proposing here is that on election day, when you're at this central location, and you're doing all this processing, and you're uploading the cards, the clerk's gonna be there, and to maintain this sense of observation, oversight, transparency, et cetera, rather than having a full board there, the clerk would designate one of these, at least one of these three positions, internal auditor, IT director, or the ombudsman, to be present at the same time. So that she's not trying to manage the whole board, making sure there's no vacancies and blah, 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 but she does have somebody there to be an impartial observer and say, this is what I saw, this is what happened, and so on.
Is the board itself enumerated someplace?
I don't think
The
we're
DPR
not using the
review.
board at all.
There's nothing in code about, there's, the data processing review board is mentioned somewhere in code, but it's like, oh, by the way, like, don't forget to buy them lunch. It's sort of an aside, but it doesn't have anything to do with their duties or their role. And the role of the data processing review board and the AccuVote testing board are sort of complicated. And so it's sort of like the by mail board. It just makes more sense to have election officials do those tasks rather than appointing a board to do that. Now, it might end up being a board, but Dennis has written this to give us the flexibility. I don't think that a board ever reviewed the uploading.
Not the uploading, but they did, prior to me being in the clerk's office, but my understanding is that there was a board that would do spot checks. And that's something that we have discussed bringing back.
Just for the record, Mr. Trains joined us.
That was something that I was really surprised when I came to this election commission to find that there was no longer a data processing review. We, when my tenure in the clerk's office, relied on them very, very much. But that's what I'm trying to understand. And they were never in the code then either.
Exactly. So we're working on that. The AccuVote testing board was election officials, and Amanda had election officials perform that function.
And that was like the state does it, isn't it, Gwen?
And so we're still looking at that and figuring out those roles. We're not getting rid of the function, but it might not be the title data processing review board or AccuVote testing board, but the functions are still gonna happen.
But they were IT types who had a lot of, computer type experience. That was, I thought, vital at the time, but maybe not anymore.
Also, for the record, Mr. Stars joined us on the phone.
Any more questions of Dr. Coles? Okay. 2870 talks about the methods of counting, manual counting, computer counting. What I did there is, in 2870-40, we had what was called computer counting ballots. And 2870-50 talked about counting scanned ballots. Well, the fact of the matter is that's one and the same for us, right? Because we're computer counting the scanned ballots. So to make that more concise, I condensed it, combined it, reorganized it. The basic principles are all still the same, but I think it's going to be a little bit easier to read, hopefully a little bit more efficient to go through it when you see what I've done there with that. 2880-20 talks about the envelope review procedure. It used to be called the ballot review, but really what you're doing is reviewing the envelopes on the absentees and making judgments about whether the voter is qualified to vote that ballot, whether they've done the things that they're required to do in terms of signature and so forth. So cleaned that up a little bit. I added provisions regarding at what point does somebody get to observe what's happening and make the challenge? Because the code anticipates that somebody can say, hey, wait a minute, that voter is not qualified, you can't count that. And it has to happen at a point in time before you separate the envelope from the ballot gets mixed in with all the other ballots, right? Because you don't want that counted if they're right. So I talk about that at page 37 in C and D about both observation and how they present the challenge. Then we go to 2880.025, page 39. This is where we talked about earlier, making some adjustments in case the election official made a mistake. Should we still be able to count that ballot? So we talked about that here. You see at subsection B2, an absentee ballot.
Which page are you on?
This is page 39. Subsection B2 of 025, it says, an absentee ballot cast in person and accepted by election official may be counted despite failure of the official to properly sign and date the voter certificate. That came up a handful of times last year, so we want to count those. And then at the bottom of that page, partial ballots, this came up as well. So we're going to address that here more directly in code, that if you use the wrong ballot, you don't get to vote for races you're not qualified to vote for. So the next big one is going to be, this is isn't necessarily a huge thing, but on page 41, the bottom, 2890.020, the recount application, we just kind of cleaned it up a little bit. There was one provision in there on page 42 where we required the people wanting to recount to have 2 sponsors and a chairperson. I just thought that was a little overkill because the clerk's office has to be in contact with the recount group. Well, is she supposed to be in touch with the 2 sponsors, or one of the 2 sponsors, or the chairperson? You know, sort of a little confusing, so we're trying to clean that up a little bit. So you see some of that in here. Let's see, where's another good one? Oh, here's a good one. Page 48. We haven't done much in terms of mail-in ballots. There's been some talk about doing some mail-in, maybe with Lursas at some point, because they're relatively small groups of voters, and it's a lot to do to manage their ballots at the same time as the general election. So, but one of the ideas that the clerk's office came up with was having drop boxes for the ballots. So you don't have to apply a stamp, you don't have to go get postage, you just have to throw it in the drop box. And so we have these drop boxes in specified locations, and people can just do that versus bothering to mail them. So you want to talk about, that idea came from someplace I think that you guys have heard about.
Barbara and I, this summer, we were in King County, Washington. They are the largest mail-in ballot election facility in the country, and we toured their facility, and it was incredible as far as how they've organized to have by-mail elections. But one thing that they've done across the state of Washington is, in order to make it easy for people to get their mail-in ballots back in, each county has a designated ballot drop box, and they're, they kind of look like large newspaper receptacles or something, and you would just drop your ballot in, and it has clear instructions on the outside. And so we had just had the conversation about, while we're looking at this stuff, if we already are getting quite a few people that are requesting ballots by mail yearly as it is, and to sort of, if we begin to move to how to make it easier for people. It was interesting, they kept saying over and over again as we were touring the facility that college students didn't know where to get stamps. Was the complaint they kept getting, and so, which, you know, interesting, so they created these drop boxes.
You would have,
Technology.
Yeah, I mean, it is.
you would have loved what happened during the tour,
Yeah.
because you were concerned last year about confidentiality of your work. So interestingly, in this facility, which was huge, they had a casino security person help design the building. And so everything that, for example, like the commission did would be behind glass, but people could see what you were doing, but you were glassed off and separated. And then all of the ceilings, there were no ceilings because they had security cameras, and then you could see all of the cords so that you could tell there were no live wires going outside outside the room and coming back in. So you know all the data was just internal.
Everywhere you looked, there were signs that said, "You are on camera." So you would be sitting there doing your job, and there would be a camera, you know, from all the different angles, so that the public would be able to access that there is no tampering with the ballots, but they're not able to see the secure information. But it is really a nice mix of that transparency that we look for in elections, but maintaining, you know, the confidentiality of the secure information. It was a really great mix of that.
So the cameras were live on their website,
Yeah.
so.
So in this by mail section, what we've done here is said that either you mail it in, it's got to be postmarked by midnight of the day of the election, or you drop it into the Dropbox by midnight, day of the election, or it's received by an election official at a designated polling place. So if you had some different sites, let's say they had something here at City Hall, you could just drop it off here at City Hall with the clerk's office. I don't recall, maybe Amanda, you can address this, if you drop it off in a designated Dropbox by midnight, how do you know somebody doesn't go to 12:30 or 1 a.m.? How does that work?
We'll have to talk to what they do and.
Yeah,
Have somebody there to collect them at midnight.
Yeah.
yeah, you know, so if you have 5 or 6 boxes out there, you gotta have 5 or 6 people.
Automatic locks and
pick them up. Yeah,
time locks.
right, exactly. So we're anticipating the possibility here, but there obviously would be some details that would have to be worked out through procedures and actually buying the boxes and doing all those sorts of things so that you're ready to do it. And then, of course, the clerk's office would designate where those are. Okay. That covers the Dropbox piece. Let's see. So this one will catch your eye on page 50, 28, 120, 60. This is the election commission duties. Number 6. So the old code said that the commission would review the questionable and absentee ballots. But in fact, what you're really doing is reviewing the results of the tabulation of those things. So we've made that change there. So that'll catch your eye. And then the next thing I talked about, I mentioned this earlier, chapter 28, 150 is a new chapter. This is where we talk about emergency scenarios. And what I say here on top of page 51, in an emergency, the clerk is authorized to take action to preserve the integrity of the election while at the same time allowing people to vote who might not otherwise get an opportunity. And so here's the outline of things she can do. She can ask the court to help her out. She can keep polling locations open longer, move them, and so on. And then I tried to define emergency to give her some boundaries. We talked about the assembly being able to come in if there's enough time and do an emergency ordinance if that's what it takes. So what I say here, it's an event that a significant number of people will not have the opportunity to vote if the clerk does not take immediate action. And an effort to enact and implement an emergency ordinance by the assembly is not practical given the totality of the circumstances. So if you're 4 or 5 days out from the election and you have a serious problem, in most cases, the assembly would be able to address that because you can pull together the emergency meeting pretty quickly to get a quorum. But if it's the day of and the pipes break, that polling location's a disaster, clerk moves it, that would be something she could do.
And one of the other things that we talked about, and so given that this was my first election, that I wanted to make sure that we were prepared in the event of an emergency, if there was a snowstorm or something like that. So I asked Dennis if we could, let's say we had, a power outage, and the power was out from like 2 to 4. So people may have been prevented from voting, so, and we knew there were people that wanted to vote. So could we just extend voting hours instead of closing the polls at 7? Could we just close them at 9? Because the power was out for 2 hours. And so Dennis researched it and got back to me and told me that I could not do that. The clerk cannot do that. The clerk would have to get an order from a court to do that. So we wanted to make sure that we had that opportunity to be able to do that, because that's a much simpler fix for the municipality and the assembly to extend voting hours 2 hours rather than having to redo an election. So this year, we actually contacted the court. We knew who we needed to contact, and if in fact there would have been an emergency, we had plans, we knew which judge we were to contact, we knew which judge we could get that emergency order from to keep the polls open extra hours if we needed to do that. And that's part of our emergency procedures, and we will continue to do that every year.
The clerk's office this past year created an entire emergency procedure manual to address all sorts of different issues that could potentially come up and how we would react to them, so that if anything did happen, we had conversations of what if election workers were unable to get back to City Hall to return their materials, what would we do to get those materials back here? And so we've really explored every sort of potential, we talked about if there was a 64 style earthquake that happened, what could we do? So
It was a good exercise to go through, because one of the things we discovered was that while we understood that the court could provide some emergency relief, the court didn't know that we might be calling them, right? So when we first called, said, hey, what if? They said, well, we'll have to get back to you on that, because we haven't really. So now I think the plan would be in the future to say, hey, we've got an election coming up. Which judge do we run to if something goes haywire? So it was good.
Right.
Those things you don't think about. Oh, yeah, you go to court. Oh, how easy is that? Well, nobody's there. Who are you going to call?
Might be easier to get the assembly together.
Might be.
So
Might be.
we also contacted MEA, because we have some MEA polling places out in Eagle River. We contacted Chugach Electric, ML&P, AWWU. We told them all, by the way, Tuesday is election day. Please consider whether or not you are doing work in these locations. And we sent them all of the polling locations so that they knew where it is that the polling locations are. And we did ask them if they had significant work, if they could postpone it until after the election.
Yeah. And Amanda mentioned, what do you do if the election workers can't get back to headquarters? There was a case at the last Supreme Court level where a young election official kept the bag overnight in the trunk of his car. And there was a serious legal challenge, and they fought over that for some time about whether or not there was a malconduct that justified tossing those things out. The court said, well, it's definitely not how we want it done, but it was locked in the car, there's no evidence anybody touched the stuff, so we're going to count them. So we've got to figure out how to manage that when something like that were to happen again, what do you do to make sure those things stay secure. 28-150-50 on page 52. This came up 2 years ago, and if you run out of ballots, what do you do? Well, state law allowed for the use of unofficial ballots like using the sample ballots or running something across the Xerox machine, whatever they could do. And our opinion was that we could do the same thing, and we validated those voters' use of those ballots. So we just made it more clear in code that that's actually allowable if that were to happen. Now, of course, we're working a lot harder to make sure it never happens again, but you never say never, so we have a provision here to address that clearly.
And I'm glad you put in here on the last sentence on A that election officials should receive direction from the municipal clerk prior to using unofficial ballots, because I could see them thinking, oh, I can do this, if we run out, I'm not gonna call for any, you know what I mean, so it's
Right.
Great
right.
idea, thank
a
you.
little bit of control in there.
Yeah, if it's a 10-minute wait for the official ballot, I would encourage them to try to do that. It's just a lot easier for everybody if we use an official ballot when we can. 20 minutes, half an hour, people get angry and start marching out. Maybe that's a little different. Because you want them to vote, you don't want them to walk away mad and not vote. Yeah, so actually 28-150-60 at the bottom, this is the weather road conditions one. This is actually in our code. I just reorganized a little bit under this emergency section. If weather or road conditions are bad, you send out a police officer to go get those ballots. Right? Now, hopefully the police officers are in a car that can do that.
We
But that's the
did
idea.
contact, we had several meetings with APD before the election, and we talked about security and safety. And we did have an agreement with APD that they were prepared to assist us on election day, and we will do the same thing again in the next election.
And then chapter 28-200, I mentioned earlier, this is the new section on election offenses. The vast majority of this is right out of state law. And I gave you an example earlier where we don't do the higher grade felonies or the APOC stuff. So 28-200-100 is an example of that. We have in here campaign misconduct in the 3rd degree only. We don't take on the 1st and 2nd degree, which are handled at the state level. That's why that's written that way. Most of them are going to be pretty obvious. They're going to make
Then
sense.
it's on A1, where it says you can't be within 200 feet of entrance or polling location.
Yeah.
We have some subdivisions, the homes are closer to the polling position, so you're telling the homeowners they can't have a sign in their yard?
That's a good question. I don't know what the legal rule on that is.
We need to find out, because we do have some subdivisions where you can see the house,
Yeah.
homes are right around the polling place.
Yeah.
So you're telling a homeowner they can't have a sign in your yard, you need to let them know ahead of time.
Yeah, because what it says you can't is a person cannot be there, post political signs.
Because every politician will find the closest house to the polling place to have their sign put up.
Right.
Not me, but every other one.
Exactly.
But I do know where the one is right next to Rogers Park Elementary School and Airport Heights, and
Yeah. And
people identify them.
here's the thing, when the 200 feet, is it from the entrance?
It's from the door.
Yeah,
So
so-
usually you can see it, but it's not quite. So we provide all of the precincts with 200-foot string, so they will be able to go out and measure it and make sure that it's.
Well, I would try going to elementary school, and walking 200 feet to the closest private property line. I think it's closer than that.
From the entrance to
From
the
the entrance to the
building.
school door,
And
yes.
we can talk offline, Dick, if you could just let us know which buildings.
I just thought I'd
those are.
bring it up to you
Thank
guys.
you.
Yeah, thank you.
We need to address it.
And then the last section, 28-300, deals with just reorganizing the provisions on appeals so that it's in one spot instead of sprinkled throughout the code under the issues. The main thing there is that you may have all your races pretty well wrapped up, but maybe you have one that's controversial and has issues. Trying to clarify that the assembly can certify all those other races. You know, you can have an appeal on this one straggler that has some issues, so that the majority of the thing can go forward and be done, final. While we may have one race that's maybe it's gonna have a recount or an election contest. So that's the fast, high-level overview of what's in there. The plan next is here. I think we have, well, first it's a question of what your committee might want to do and how you might want to receive input at this point, how you want to move forward.
Well, how long do you need? How soon, well, how far away from the election would you need this passed by the assembly?
You know, I actually think that Dennis may better advise you for that, with that, because I think it may be, I think the issue is when would it be prudent for the assembly to pass it? In last year, we discussed doing it before members have to declare whether they're candidates or not. And so that is a different issue that I'll let Dennis address. As far as we're concerned, we really don't have a deadline. I think we can operate satisfactorily with the current code, but there's no, I mean, I think that the changes they're substantial. Dennis has done an incredible amount of work here. But we would hope maybe by the end of the year, if those two goals match.
We start really gearing up for the election. We start in December, but January is where we really start hitting it hard, so it would be nice to have it addressed before then, just so that
Is that when you start training election workers?
we train election workers in March, but we start hiring them in December.
Okay.
So it's nice to understand.
Dennis, how much more work do you think has to be done on this?
I certainly have some cleanup to do here and there, but the next big thing is really just take this table and turn it into an ordinance.
Sure.
And that doesn't take all that long. So it would be good to have some feedback from the commission before I do that. Although that's not absolutely necessary, because I would expect them to provide feedback at the assembly level, because I would assume the assembly level would want to hear from them, and some, probably in the form of a resolution from the commission.
So you think it would be more beneficial for you to clean it up, then we can send it to the election commission, they review it, then it comes to us?
You can do it that way, or you can introduce it at the assembly level and refer it to the commission, and have their recommendation come back at about the same time as the public hearing.
Would it get done faster if we introduced it and then sent it over?
Yeah, the best thing from my perspective is to get his rewrite on this thing.
Yeah.
Introduce it to the assembly and send it to the election commission.
Okay. All right, let's do that.
That way it gives them the time to work on it, because we want to have it back in January for the assembly to take action on it, so the clerk has it. I'd want to have that before people file, because it could influence your decision to file or not.
Sure. Okay.
So then the commission typically doesn't meet, their organizational meeting is typically in January, but I might suggest that you probably would want to meet as soon as this is introduced and referred to you.
So why don't we introduce it on the November 5th? Is that our meeting, the first meeting in November?
Who knows how long he's going to take to redo the
I
rewrite?
can do that.
You can do that?
Yeah, because that means getting it to you guys on the regular agenda or the addendum.
No, later on the
Yeah,
table.
that's.
Okay, no, they don't.
Yeah, I can make that.
Okay.
And then,
There's no debate at it, we just have
Yeah.
to reintroduce it.
Would you like
For the
a-
committee.
would you like a work session sometime with the whole assembly sometime after it? We can work on that, but if you'd like a work session in December.
That would make sense.
Okay,
That would make sense. In December sometime.
okay.
Okay.
Or would you deal with the issue of, like, one person that lives in a precinct, but you have to still create 50 ballots because that's the minimum size? Would you deal with that in here at all?
I do not deal with that in here, and I'm not sure that this is something we can deal with in here. That is an issue that has more to do with assembly redistricting, which I believe is in Title II. And so that would be something that we would love to have a different conversation with you, and I think it's inevitable that we're gonna have that conversation after the Supreme Court rules on the state redistricting
Okay,
plans.
we can deal with that later. I just wanted to see it, but you had to figure out a way to put it in here, but we can deal with it later. It's like, you have to produce 50 of them, because that's the minimum size. There's only one person lives in the precinct.
Yeah, I think it's still
It's
the
wasting
case on
money.
redistricting, just as a point of information, that the state is anticipating being done in November.
That's what I heard last time I talked to them. So potentially we will
Then we
have
have to
to.
redistrict the assembly, so we get rid of street precincts, because we could end up with just as many street precincts as we had before with the redistricting.
The other things that really create the split precincts is the limited road service areas and the fire and park service areas along with ARTSA. So if there's a fire bond, a park bond, or a road bond on the ballot, we have to organize folks by living in or out of those districts. So
Well, let us know, Amanda, what's the best way to deal with it, because,
Get rid of service areas.
You've been.
oh, I wish. I told you I wanted to do the hillside, didn't I?
Get rid of service.
You know,
Get rid of
or-
those that aren't in Parks and Rec.
Or if
Rid of
we
LRCs
could
first.
consolidate the LURSs on the hillside in one precinct on the hillside, one precinct. And so how many people are in a precinct, I'm not really, I don't know that.
I don't know the answer.
But we had 16
For the,
ballots.
for the record, Mr. Clemens joined us.
16 different ballots in one precinct, so we have, and we did have an extra election worker, but I'm sure some of you know in your precinct, in my precinct, there's one ballot, because we're all in ARTSA, we're all in parks, we're all in fire, and so there's one ballot, which makes it easier for the election workers. You can imagine when you walk into a precinct and there's 16 different ballots to choose from. It's very complicated.
Let alone on our end, managing, creating, distributing. We had 45 ballot styles at the last election. So all of those have to be edited, make sure everything is right on everything, so.
So Mr. Trainey's question is that in one precinct where there are 16 ballots, our ballot printer requires us to order 50, 25 in a pack. So we send 25 of a pack to that, of 16 to the precinct, all 16 in 25 of a pack to each of the absentee and early voting locations. So it's a huge cost to us and to the city to do that. And so if we could limit those different ballot styles, it would be really streamlining and making a lot of things more efficient.
I'm trying to do whatever we can to help you guys out in the park.
The other-
This is why we were exploring the concept of mail-in balloting for the LURSs, because that would just help get rid of that issue. Create separate management issues in terms of that it's a separate election, but there's
So it
some
makes more
trade-offs there.
sense, doesn't it, if we can do mail-ins for versus, try and make that happen.
Well, especially because a lot of times, nobody wants to even run for them, and we have the mayor pick somebody, or.
Well, we have
scrounge up-
write-ins.
Remember one time we had
scrounge
to
up a
flip a coin
volunteer.
at the assembly?
What's that?
We had to flip a coin because there were only two that ran.
Yeah, yeah.
To decide which one won, we had to flip a coin.
Well, they were write-ins, so we didn't have anyone on the ballot. Each year we had to have between 3 to 6 LURSs that nobody applies for. So then we have write-ins and we have to go through and determine who was written in, and then we have to determine if that person's qualified. And then we contact that person to see in fact if they want to serve, so we don't want to put somebody on a board that doesn't want to serve, so. And sometimes we have multiple people who want to serve, and that's when we've flipped the coin in the past.
So we really appreciate your support on understanding that that's a big issue, and we'll try and work over the next year or so to try and resolve some of those difficulties.
Quinn, you had your hand
I was just, I see on the very last, it says add a section adopting a guide for observers and watchers.
Yeah.
Effective dates.
Yeah.
Where do we sit on that kind of?
Well, we have a draft guide, and it's, so far, I haven't touched it this year, it's the one that we put together for last April. And, yeah, my hope would be that, at least that first iteration of the guide would be reviewed and incorporated through this process. But I don't know that we had a chance to go through that yet, so.
I
How-
noticed-
How would that fit in the timetable? We're talking later date, or what are you thinking?
You could do it a number of different ways. If I get it together, then you'll have it as part of your review.
I noticed in the actual text that Dennis drafted, one of the things that he included was that the observers and watchers have to take an oath. And so I thought you would appreciate that.
Okay, question then. Sorry.
Is there, in the past, they could not go beyond a certain area, so that they weren't looking at the computer,
Yeah.
looking at everybody's data, and they couldn't look at the ballots. So I wondered if that would work to have a cutoff line. They can see everything that's going on, they can see that there is no
Right, so,
malfeasance being
so
performed.
the state, if I remember right, has a room, and there's some segregation in that room. Here, we talked about how we arrange the tables, and so I haven't done anything more than just that they need to be a respectful distance away so they can't see this stuff. Whatever that means in terms of how we configure the room, we have to decide. We may not codify that because we may not even be in this room depending on what our needs are. What I did do, though, for the polling locations is I copied the exact text out of the state reg, which says you can't sit in between election workers at the table. There's like 4 or 5 different things, I forget what section it is. Things like that, they had a specific reg that said at the polling locations, the observers and watchers can't do these things. And so I just incorporated it into ours.
So we need more discussion on that, right? Is that, or you're gonna work on that and then?
Yeah, I think what I'm gonna do is have language that just talks in generalities, they can't see certain things. You have to be a certain distance that safeguards the information. And then you just take that general rule and you apply it based on the configuration of the room that you're using, or election central or collection center, whatever you wanna call it. The designated
Return site.
return site.
I like the glass room idea.
Yeah.
That would be
Well,
good, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and maybe someday we have that as we get bigger and have a lot more need for space and control. But last time around, it wasn't ideal, but we managed it okay. We had the computers over here, if I remember correctly, right?
When we were more concerned, when we were going over the identifiers of the mail-in ballots and all that
When
kind
you
of
were guys
stuff.
in that room there?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah. And did we keep them generally right there at the doorway?
No.
Or did they?
No, they were
wandered
at our
around?
shoulder.
Yeah. And I think we had them sign the non-disclosure agreements, right? Confidentiality agreements. The oath is that concept.
You know, I think the concept maybe that the room is really uncomfortable, and we understand that there's a balance between what information they're entitled to look at. But my concern, and I think what we talked about, was they were in your personal space. It wasn't that they were just observing. It was that it was physically uncomfortable. And I think that we need to come up with a different way to set up the room so that they're not, it was just uncomfortable, and we understand that.
That's very correct, and that is probably the major, but probably more important is when they had their notebooks copying things and they'd question information that was in the confidential list. That concerned us.
I think
Yes.
one of the ways other places manage this is that the commission somehow talks loudly enough. John Smith in such and such place, right? And that their observation is hearing that, and then they can say, "Oh, wait a minute, I want to challenge that one."
Yeah, that was one of the.
It's a question: is how much information do they need to have so that they had the opportunity to challenge somebody. But if you're all soft-spoken, polite commissioners, and they can't hear you, then what are they gonna have to be able to see to meet that same duty?
We need a bigger room.
A bigger room could be.
I agree with that.
You're talking to the right group here.
They were asking details about, oh, it says over here, you didn't say that. Well, it's on someone's personal record, whether they have a felony, whether they have this or that. And that should be reserved
Right.
for the individual, and
Right.
we have all.
But like you were saying, even the verbal, we did not verbalize information as we're looking, which we possibly, I mean, that could be a point of discussion of that which is not the confidential, you know, because that's what they did at the polling places.
But you
They
can
would say-
imagine how that would just
Oh, that-
slow your
oh, that's
work
true.
down.
Yeah.
If, I mean, you are working as fast as you can to check that data in REMS.
Verbal.
And if it has to be verbalized, it'll slow you down by at least half. That's my guess. I'm not sure what your opinion is.
So as the elections get more intense, there's gonna be this pressure on us to be more formal, so we avoid challenges. And if we have to be more formal, that puts more on people such as yourselves. And we're just gonna figure out how to manage that and to deal with that.
So in other words, my understanding is then that there are gonna be general guidelines that you're gonna add in here. And then,
There'll be a separate document, it'll be the handout like the state uses.
okay, is that gonna be defined though in this document? Or is this going to be a general guideline and then you're gonna create the form? I guess that's my question. Because I noticed on the back here, it talks about adopting a guide for observers and watchers. Is that something that's going to be in the code?
The guideline will be in the code.
Okay, I would assume not, I
Yeah.
just wanted to clarify that, yeah. Okay. One of the other things that we talked about at one of our meetings, whenever we had one, I don't recall when, was that those that are the observers and watchers, do sign that oath about confidentiality and so forth. I think we had brought up the point that maybe they need to send something back to the municipal clerk stating that the information that they do have or that they did take during that day has now been destroyed because it was confidential. I don't know if you remember that conversation, but we did have that. I don't know if that's, the commission talked about it, so I'm just throwing it out as a discussion that we had.
I don't think they should be taking confidential information in the first instance.
Okay.
We felt that
So
way.
yeah.
So-
We agree.
What is it that they need to verify the voter's eligibility? So we gotta talk about that.
Well, if they're
I'm
not gonna have
sure.
access to the screen, then
Yeah,
our
all the
discussion
shepherds.
is moot at this point, but
Yeah.
that's what was happening last year, or earlier this year.
But if they did, they need to know the voter's name, and they had some voter contact information. And for some of the question voters, because we had asked them to let us know ahead of time if they had a question, and they were supposed to put that in writing, and some of them they asked about, and you resolved those. But it was interesting because at the public canvas, they had a couple of voters here, and they challenged a couple, so they brought up names, and they had voters. So what information did they get from observing that allowed them to contact those voters, and was any of that information that you're talking about?
I have a question. I'm sorry for coming in a little late, so maybe you've already addressed it. I apologize for that. But when you're giving those examples, I'm going on my own personal experiences, that of my family and friends that I've noticed. But are you saying that if someone shows up on voting day, there's maybe a question of the validity of the voter? Is that what you're saying?
No, this is when we go through the stuff to verify whether they're qualified to vote, and the mail-in, the
I see.
absentee.
Okay. I wasn't sure how that.
Yeah, I think we're most talking about the absentee question.
Absentee
That
question.
was- Yeah. So there's, you have the envelopes that have their personal identifiers on them. And the commission's using that to verify whether that person is voted the right ballot or whether they're even eligible to vote at all. And so the observers and watchers have the opportunity to challenge that voter. Well, how do you challenge a voter unless you've seen enough information to confirm for yourself that there's a problem? Sometimes you just have to know the person because you know them personally or you live next to them. Other times you don't know. You see something that makes you wonder, I don't know that person's qualified.
So in the code, it says if you, at the polls, were to see something like that, they would be able, most likely to vote a question ballot, which then could be later validated or verified through research. Is that what you're saying?
But, yeah, right, typically at the polls, if they're on the register, they're gonna
Right.
get to vote.
But if somebody
But
sees
if
something
not,
that looks
yeah,
odd
yeah,
or
exactly.
whatever. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from the commission?
Those are great questions, thank you.
So if I understand it properly, the process that we're gonna follow is, from here on out, is that, Dennis, you're gonna provide additional clarifications and some of this stuff
I'm gonna give you an ordinance.
in ordinance, at which point we'll introduce it on the first meeting, November 5th, first meeting in November. We'll have three for introduction. I'll add my name as a sponsor. If Mr. Trainee, Mr. Harmon want to as well, that way we'll automatically have three for introduction.
Do you need to have it introduced by the committee or by
Oh.
official name?
You can do
Yeah, just
either
do it by
way.
committee.
Either-
Just do it by
doesn't matter
committee.
to me, but whatever
Committee's
he wants.
fine. Bill?
He's on Palmer.
I know he's on the phone, but anyways, yeah, just do it by the committee, that'd be fine. And then we'll send it to the election commission, and then my request would be that it would be back before the assembly in the first meeting in December. That way we can have, if need be, 2 public hearings in December on it. That way we'll get it done in December.
What was your question, Adam?
We're just wondering if you'd be okay as the committee itself sponsoring the ordinance for Title 28 rewrite, or if you want it to be individual names.
No, I don't see there's any trouble with that. The formality, you have to take a vote at the committee level. That's the way you validate that. I think in terms of committee action supports the introduction, that's my opinion. It's fine.
Okay, all right, we'll do committee as a whole.
On the final document, though, I'd rather do it if there's a way to do it prior to introduction, so we can see the entire thing. I have one question, if you don't mind stepping back just for a second.
Sure.
If you can hear me, great. If not, then maybe repeat it. There was one clause that changed the validity of the vote if you didn't use the correct ballot. Can you clarify that, Dennis? What you mean by? I thought you said it's invalidated if you don't use the correct ballot. Did I hear that correctly?
You can use an unofficial ballot, it's okay. And we've clarified that in this code proposal. So,
I got the part about the sample ballot being submitted in absence of having any ballots available for that. But I thought earlier in your, I didn't write down the section number, but I thought you had referenced use of incorrect ballot. Or did I hear?
oh, yeah, the incorrect ballot. So if you're voting out of district, for example, let's say you, for whatever reason, you stop at a polling location and you get a ballot that isn't appropriate for where you actually live. So somebody in Eagle River should be voting in an Eagle River Assembly member's race, but because they're in Anchorage and grab a ballot that has the Midtown race, they fill out that portion of the ballot.
Hey,
Well,
just without interrupting, how could that happen if you check in at the polling station and they review you? Can you bypass the check-in table, if you will, that would hand you that ballot to begin with?
yeah,
Does that happen?
yeah, they're not on the register list because they're in the wrong place, but they want to vote there. It's 7:55, and the voter says, look, I'll go ahead and vote a question ballot. The only ballot available is going to have that Midtown race on it, so they're going to vote it, but the only thing we're going to count are all the area-wide races that they were qualified to vote on. You had to-
Right.
Yeah,
So you would, I don't know what that process is called, but you would segregate the ballot in the voter, for example, if they voted on the bond, that could still carry, because that's an area-wide question. Is that what you're saying will happen?
exactly.
Okay, that makes sense, I suppose, other than the ignorance of the voter that perhaps used to live in that precinct and then moved and didn't realize the ramifications application of it went to where they were most comfortable, but maybe that's just a voter education thing.
Well, sometimes it's just voters are in a hurry, they forgot to the last minute. I mean, all kinds of things come up where they just get to the closest place and vote.
But it's no, it couldn't be interpreted that the polling worker gave them the wrong ballot. You know, we had that conversation about 45 or 60 different types of ballots. If the voting election worker gives them the wrong ballot, how does that get addressed?
It's essentially the same outcome, only those races that they are allowed to vote on are counted.
Okay. That's all. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
I have one question
Sure.
on that. On page 39, I had made a note, and since it was just brought up, you're using the word improper ballot, and I just think that the word improper is not a good term to use, if I could throw that out. On the bottom of page 39, where you're saying improper, I mean, it sounds like, you know what I mean? It just, it's not, it doesn't really explain what the issue is there. Does that make sense? Maybe a different term could be used? Voter uses a,
Yeah, I'm open to suggestions. I don't know what to say. Improper,
you know, where a voter-
wrong, or incorrect. or-
Incorrect, Dennis?
and are we saying
Yeah.
uses instead of votes? A voter votes on a ballot, not of their voting precinct, do you see what I mean, or something like that? The word improper just makes it sound like it was the voter's fault that it was improper, and not the fact that they went to the wrong precinct. Anyway, I'm just throwing that out for suggestion. It
Okay.
just doesn't read right to me. And my other point, I'm sorry I'm being a sticky wicket on points, but partial ballots, that also to me is not a very good description of what that particular section is. And I don't have another suggestion for that. But you're saying partial ballots, so maybe we could, I don't know, I'm just throwing that out. Those two terms just don't really say what that section is about.
Well, as this goes to your committee anyways, that'll be an opportunity for you guys to work on that language as well.
And one of the things that we're trying to suggest there, and we may have the cart before the horse, is that we're gonna count a partial ballot. I think that might be the wrong term at the front end, but the point is that voter is only gonna get
Exactly.
partial.
I agree with that.
Okay,
I agree
good.
with that.
And
Yeah.
that's the
The
state.
concept's there, but it just not.
Okay.
The state uses that term a lot.
That's what we were calling out of district, right?
Yes.
The
Partial
area-wide.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you, well, and you can let us know if you like out of district better, we're,
Thank you. I guess to that point, it's not the ballot that's improper, it's the voter. But I'm thinking in those instances where an out-of-district voter uses a ballot or something, should the description be on the voter and not the ballot? Where I work in a school, and school teachers come in to vote, and I wonder why they give up their opportunity to vote for the person who's running for assembly. But many of them do. I mean, they'll come in or even, you know, a state candidate, and they'll vote on, yeah, okay, and they'll vote on the rest of the ballot. But they just want to vote at the school where they work.
Right.
And so they're voting out of district, out of precinct. The ballot, you know, the ballot is fine, but
Might not-
they're
might not
choosing
really-
to vote because it's convenient. And they always have this argument, well, you know, I might not have time. Well, you know, a former school teacher who works with us says that's a bunch of malarkey. He's talked about that a lot. They obviously, you know, get off at 3 or 4, or even if they stay till 5, they could still stop at their own precinct,
Yeah.
but they choose not to. So they vote out of district, out of precinct, and, yeah. And those are always, and they'll sit there and fill out the whole question, the whole question ballot, because they
Yeah,
don't live.
I'm not sure if I can use out of precinct or out of district, because some of these could be getting the wrong card, you're in the right precinct,
Yeah.
you're not in
Yeah, I
that
don't know.
Versa, right? You weren't supposed to have that one, so,
But anyway, that's,
I'm definitely open to suggestions for.
so, yeah, maybe, yeah, thank you, I'm not sure
All your wonderful work.
what the proper adjective is.
All right, we're scheduled at 11 with the other, okay.
Mr. Chairman, just a point on that last one, I guess we also want to make sure that it couldn't be misused, the intentional going out of precincts that you don't particularly care about the election, but you want to sway the vote on a bond. I just caution there that the voters don't figure out a workaround. It's not technically illegal, but all of a sudden figure that out. So I could see that potential happening on the partial credit.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Starr. If there's no other questions, we'll adjourn this part. Thank you so much, and we'll send this over to you as soon as we get the opportunity. We will go around the table, introduce ourselves. This meeting of the Ethics and Elections Committee on the Ethics Code rewrite for gifts for ASD employees. Starting with
Linda Richardson, Administrative Hearing Officer.
Deanna's Deputy Municipal Attorney.
David Nasbitt, Board of Ethics.
Ted Carlson, Board of Ethics.
And Keith Silver, Board of Ethics.
Adam Trombley. Okay.
What happened to your committee?
Well, Dick had another meeting to go to, and I don't know, so.
Just as long as you don't leave.
No, I don't think so. But if I have to go to the bathroom, I guess I'll get to that. That should be fine. Go ahead.
Well, I believe, Dee's gone through and done a little bit of work on this to fix some of the issues that were brought up.
Yep.
And at the joint meeting here several weeks back. And the only other thing I think that's been changed in here, as I spoke to you on the phone, is the effective date, which was an agreement we made with the school district at the time when we had a meeting with them.
Yeah, when, July 1st, 2014?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah.
And we'll deal with it for the next 6 months, but it's
Okay.
something, if you ask, sometimes you have to give to get, and it was
Yeah.
something that we felt it was important enough to do.
Okay. So, as long as you're okay with that, and the committee's okay with that, or the board's okay with that, you guys are the ones that are doing the work on those things that come to you. So if you're okay with doing it for another year, or
Well, yeah, it would be, our typical times when we have it is at the end of the school year and at Christmas time, or the end of semesters,
Yeah.
which are both coincide with the end of the school year and some Christmas. And the school district, I'm comfortable with the current administration. The school district is taking this very seriously and wants to work with it.
Okay. Dee?
And just to confirm, we really only made very few changes. One was what everyone, the ASD committee thought was a duplication of supplies. We took out the supplies from the ASD section. I took out reference to APOC position. We just haven't gotten into the APOC issue here, so I didn't really want to open that can of worms in this particular rewrite. I will say, Mr. Tremblay, one of the things that we deleted or that's in the current code that we're deleting, if you look at the very last page, or the second to last page of this rewrite, it'll show number 3, a campaign contribution to municipal employee as candidate for elective municipal office. We've taken that out just simply because it's part of the current employee gift section. I think we should address that, and now we have a little time to do that. What rules do we want with respect to that? I think all the rest of these are well within the rewrite that they're proposing. I think that one sort of stands out, and that's also along with APOC. So probably the board should get together some type of wording with respect to both APOC and campaign contributions for fellow employees. But other than that, there are virtually no changes from what we presented at the joint meeting. I do remember, Mr. Trombley, that you want this to be presented to the assembly from this committee. I will make those. I don't think that's been done yet.
Just for the record, Mr. Honeman's joined us as well. Well, I don't see, is the board okay with these changes?
Well,
Do you have any questions?
there's just one under, that I have a question on, and that's under 3F. An occasional small gift worth $50 or less, including business. What's the definition of an occasional? That's, is that once a week? Is that once, it's, with that word in there, it's almost unenforceable, you know.
Yeah.
If you know what I
Do
mean.
you have any?
Well, our problem is, Ted, I think if you took out the word occasional, then you just have a small gift worth $50 or less, and it seems almost unlimited. So I think we didn't know how to get across that this shouldn't be a regular.
Well,
I remember the board wanted to end
Yeah.
this type of stuff altogether, and it was the collective.
yeah,
will
I
that-
realize that, but you know, to me, if I was to read it without the word occasional, to me, that's, you know, I can accept a one-time gift. Yeah, but you put occasional, then, you know, maybe every month I can, you know, I don't know how to,
Sure.
how it would be best to put that, you know, we had thought about putting, you know, twice a year or something, but it just, I don't know.
Sure. Go ahead.
One option or way of handling it might be to say an occasional gift of $50 or less, not to exceed $100 annually, or something like that. Whatever you want to do to keep a lid on it with an annual max.
Okay. Cool.
That was kind of going there with perhaps add to that, which is from any individual or organization. So, with a maximum of no more than $100 annually from any individual or
Actually,
or organization.
Actually, we almost have an unlimited amount for organizations. If BP wants to give the teacher of the year, it's significantly more than $50.
Well, I guess what I mean is, I can give you an example. I go before the community at times. I did within the department when I was at the police department as an employee. And I'd go to Rotary or Lions or whatever. If I went to the same organization twice and they decided to give me some little something award and it was less than $50, they can only take it no more than $100 worth from that organization during the year. So that way, if I'm a teacher and I've got 30 students and one parent wants to give me gifts, no more than $100, period, in a year. And another student's family wants to give me, you know, then they're limited too. So that's what I think the intent.
Are you comfortable with that? Because that goes actually back to the other rule that we actually had and it's been
Right.
taken out.
Yeah. Yeah, but, you know, so just not to exceed $100 per year or annually, and just leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I could, that would at least give us something, and give them, you know, any municipal employee something, you know, I mean, it's understandable, it's not debatable.
And I think that the 2 points were, I think that the part that we actually eliminated had some reference to $100 in a year or a school year, because the whole concept was, this was directed to ASD employees. We wanted to put some limit on how much students or a parent could, no, but this is for all employees, I understand that. I guess, and my ultimate point is this, and that is that as in any rewrite, we had to, the board originally wanted to eliminate it altogether, but obviously through the process, we have added an amount back in. And we have to, I think to a certain extent, we have to rely on people's reasonable interpretation of the statute, rely on good faith efforts from parents and from students and from other people, not to abuse this section. I mean, we can't eliminate everything. We just can't. And we have to rely on the fact that maybe there will be some abuse, but at some point it's so minor that we just can't legislate it all away. So I'm in support of the $100 per year. That would solve the problem. That would fill the gap left from the provision that we eliminated. It also addresses the issue that really what we were concerned about is some parents giving too much throughout a year.
Parsing it out.
And it also would help define occasional, and I'm supportive of that. That works.
Dee, would you like to make that change and resubmit, or I can make an amendment on the floor unless you want? Okay. And then, Mr. Horn, would you like to co-sponsor this?
I would do.
Okay. You can put Mr. Horn and I as sponsors.
Can I make one other suggestion? The effective date, one of the other things we can do, we're doing a lot of ordinances affecting code changes, is that part of this could go into effect the non-ASD portion to go into effect immediately. I guess my concern with that is even the, the whole thing, maybe as it applies to ASD, these safe harbors really are very helpful. It disposes of disclosure requirements for a huge amount of these smaller gifts. And whether we just said it would not it would not apply to the ASD employees until July 14th.
Okay.
And maybe put in the AM, and the reason for that is because it's an entirely different educational process.
Okay.
For them. I mean, so anyway, that's a thought, because the safe harbors really will save a tremendous amount of time and much clearer to, I think, the average employee what's expected from them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Why don't we write that in there?
Okay, so what you're saying then, it would be, this would become effective, say, January 1?
Will it become effective immediately upon passage?
Okay, except for section 4.
Well, it'd
Or,
be
except for ASD employees?
ASD employees, because actually even the section 3 applies to ASD employees.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay.
So it'd have to be the group.
Okay.
And then that would be effective July 1st, 2014.
July 1st.
Their school year.
And I'll just
Okay.
explain that in the AM.
Yeah,
That works.
okay.
Go ahead.
Quick question. You feel that this will meet the needs or the concerns that the Board of Commission has had to deal with, particularly when it comes to employee issues? Do you feel that we're getting there, or do you think this is going to be?
My gut feeling after working with the last 4 years or so, yes, 4 or 5 years, I think it'll reduce significantly the amount of disclosures that we have. Not that, we're trying to keep away from disclosures, but part of it is, a lot of this disclosures is we've sent to the local ethics person within their own department, which is really where it needs to go to begin with, rather than it coming all the way to us.
My question is, just as a gatekeeper, even though you wouldn't necessarily need to see it to a vote or approve one way or the other, that was within the confines of the ordinance or not, is it useful to have, whether we codify it or not, someone like your gatekeepers at their ethics officer at the local level, to say, hey, we had 50 disclosures that fell under 3A or 3B or whatever? Is that something that's worth noting so that we can, because otherwise people are going to say, it happens all the time, and nobody can, it's anecdotal. Is that something that, should we be even focused on that? Maybe I'm getting too much in the weeds.
Yeah, I'd defer to you. I think having at least having the at least how many disclosures the ethics officers got kept for statistical purposes to keep track of how we're doing.
That feeds in with these, like, if I'm an employee and I got general rule, I don't have to disclose to the ethics committee, but perhaps I need to acknowledge that, hey, I got this nice gift. Or are we just trying to eliminate that altogether?
I think we're trying to eliminate disclosures for these simpler gifts.
I guess I'm just thinking, perhaps, and maybe I'm just overthinking it, but you had it.
I was going to say, Mr. Hunterman, the other thing is, besides the amount of work that comes to the ethics board on this is also the ethics officers, and of which I'm one. I probably get 3 questions a week about this kind of stuff. And we handle it all across the city, as you know. So there's a tremendous amount of other work going on that I think this will really help. Where things don't quite fall within the current safe harbor at all. Tickets to evolving we just get a lot of this.
Mr. Holman, that was my point. Simply that I think it'll help us, but I think it'll help everybody. And especially Dee in her office, because she has been a tremendous filter for us, frankly. And I think this will help everybody.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, the other correction request I should make is that when it says from, if you could put the Ethics and Elections Committee.
Okay.
I appreciate that on the AM. And Mr. Hunt and I will be co-sponsors on it. And Barbara, we'll put this on the agenda for November 1st. Or the first meeting in November.
November 5th?
November 5th, yeah.
Okay. And will, the one question is, D, going to be submitting it through PACE? Or
Lisa and I will work that out.
Okay.
Yes, we'll make
So-
sure it gets submitted.
So we'll make sure, okay, we'll work on that, make sure that it gets submitted. We've got plenty of time before the deadline, and we'll just work out the details of how that gets submitted.
Is this something that will be part of the consent agenda? Or
It's an
not likely to be
ordinance.
pulled out to regular?
No,
Okay,
it's an
so-
ordinance for introduction.
So I'll.
Right.
So it'll have a public hearing.
Okay,
It
so I'll
it
show
will be
for that.
set for a public hearing. Do you have do you want to let us know now when you'd
Yeah.
like to?
Public hearing would be on,
It should be probably, I would discourage you from November 19th. That's your date to approve the budget, so I would encourage you to do December 3rd.
you know what, is it too late? Have we passed the deadline for the 22nd?
Well, you haven't technically, but I think you have the same problem. Your first hearing on the budget
Yeah, you're
is, it's your second hearing on the budget. So we're encouraging people to set for public hearing in December.
Okay, we'll set public hearing in December. You all right with that?
Okay.
I'm good with that.
Thank you.
I don't anticipate this will create a lot of public fervor.
Who knows?
Never know.
You never know. What's that meeting date?
December 3rd is your first meeting in December.
Okay. Well, I really do appreciate all the work you guys did, and I, this, even though it looks like a small change, the work that went into it is a tremendous amount, and so the Assembly, I know as a whole, really appreciates the work of all you guys. Thank you very much, so.
It's good use of your time. I'm hopeful that in the end, you'll feel the same way. I can see those things.
All right, well, nothing else? We are good.
Very good.